Hola, la matequita de cacahuete. Hey, it's Tuesday here at Off the Bench. I'm Reed Mouse. We had a long pre-show meeting today, and we got a great show for you. Man, it feels great waking up after the Steelers once again just get the break speed off them in the post. I mean, it's becoming the highlight of my year, as sad as that is, but it is. Every year, I know that the Steelers are going to make the postseason, and I know that the game is going to be 1-0, as it was again last night. We'll talk about the AFC North. And once again, probably foolishly, I am very confident in our Cincinnati Bengals' ability to turn things around. And it's in part because of where the Bengals are at, and in part because a lot of discord in the American Football Conference North Division. We're going to have Craig Sandlin on later today. Craig Sandlin, obviously host of Chatterbox Bengals, one of the recurring voices on Chatterbox Reds. We're going to talk both. We're going to talk both because we didn't talk about the couple of moves the Reds made over the weekend. They made a big deal. I mean, Pierce Johnson, $6 million. That's a significant move. Reading through the tea leaves there, what does that mean for the rest of this offseason? I asked the Discord. Chatterbox has a Discord. If you're not a member, join in. It's a lot of fun, a lot of Reds conversation every single day. And sometimes I tease them. I asked them, I said, how much money have the Reds committed to their bullpen? And I was told $21 million. And for a team that has yet to sign a significant bat, I know it doesn't matter the order of operations, but as it currently sits here on January 13th, I don't know if that's a great sign. We'll ask Craig about all that. Stone! You excited for our little Tuesday show? What do you have planned for the 11 o'clock hour?
I am. We'll talk some Bengals offseason stuff, some Dan Pitcher stuff. I feel like that's kind of floating under the radar. He's definitely not the top candidate for Cleveland, but hopefully the Bengals have a backup plan if he is not back next year. We'll throw some names out there. Lots of head coaching buzz this time of year across the NFL. 8 current openings. We'll see if the Eagles becomes open, if the Steelers becomes open, if the Packers becomes open. I doubt any of those become open, but still 8 openings here at this point. We'll discuss them all, throw some names around. If we have some time, we'll take a Chicago Cubs detour and talk about your guy Alex Bregman and how that impacts the Cincinnati Reds next year. And I know you're just dying to talk about that.
I am. I'm trying my best. I'm trying my darndest to hide the excitement. Other than the fact that I've reached out to a couple Cubs podcasters to ask if they'd come on the show. I haven't heard back yet. That was late last night. So I'm sure that'd be great, riveting content that you guys will love. Getting some Cubs podcasters on here. You've already had one on your show before. But it's, listen, when you're a Bengals fan and when things aren't going well, sometimes you got to find the joy out of your rivals falling flat on their face once again. And if you've watched this show, if you know me, if you know my fandom as being a Cincinnati Bengals fan, you know that probably just beneath being a Bengals fan, I am at second a Pittsburgh Steelers detester, loather, hater. And once again, they get into the postseason. They beat the Ravens in that final week. Winner gets in. And we sat there and we wondered, does this mean that, they got Aaron Rodgers? It's not Kenny Pickett. It's not 70-year-old Big Ben. Is this team able to make some noise in the postseason? And we found out that they made some noise as they get throttled by the Houston Texans in a game in which it was a hideous game. A hideous game. C.J. Stroud looked like he'd never played quarterback before, and they still dominated that game. But it gets me excited. And here's why it gets me excited. We here in this insular silo of a team, fan base, we have a lot to be upset about. A 6-11 season. Our head coach went 1-8 without Joe Burrow. 3 consecutive postseasons without seeing number 9 in it. What does that mean going forward? Our de facto general manager seemingly had another terrible draft. The free agents that we brought in stunk. We're bringing back Zach Taylor. A lot to be worked. But. I watched that game last night, and I couldn't help but feel. The Bengals not only should make the postseason next year, the Bengals, they won't be, but they should be favored to win the division. And I know that's crazy. I know Reed, you just laid out all the reasons why they shouldn't. They have the worst defense in the league. They have a de facto general manager that seemingly can't do anything right. They have a head coach that went 1-8 without their star player. It's basically Joe and Jamar, and maybe they are good enough to pull the ragtag bunch into the postseason as a wild card team. But listen, let's look around the league. Let's look around the division. The Baltimore Ravens, they're the best ran franchise in the division. I don't think anyone would argue that. They've got good ownership. They've got good GM. They've got a good GM. And for a while, they had a Super Bowl winning coach in John Harbaugh. But they part ways with him. And the stories that are coming out about it, he's getting called that he's getting fired. Imagine having a $10 million job and you get called that you're fired. And Lamar Jackson, who doesn't get nearly enough flack for being hurt as much as Joe Burrow does. And they've played, similar amount of games since Joe Burrow's played in the league? We've had similar kind of paths. The only difference is the Ravens have been better in the regular season, worse in the postseason by a good margin. So what's going on with Lamar Jackson? Who are they going to hire? And Lamar, I think we can all agree with his play style. He's phenomenal, 2-time MVP. But, is that going to age well? I don't think so. Okay, what about the Steelers? Another season where they make the postseason. Another season where they have a winning record. Is Mike Tomlin going to be fired? If I was the Steelers, I'd fire Mike Tomlin. You can't lose, 7 consecutive postseason games in the manner in which they have and get to keep your job. It's the same thing that we've said about Marvin Lewis. Yeah, we're great. We're happy that we're a competent team, but if you're not getting it done when it matters, then what does it matter? Is Aaron Rodgers going to come back? I don't know. Does it scare you if he does? Doesn't scare me. And yeah, they've got a great D, but it's aging. And then, of course, the Cleveland Browns, whatever they're up to, they just fired their 2-time head coach of the year. That is one of the hottest commodity in the coaching cycle. And their starting quarterback next year is going to be either Shedeur Sanders or Deshaun Watson. It doesn't scare. So we can revisit this. We can get mad. We can get mad at Paul Dehner for saying that it was the right course of action for the Bengals to stick with Zach Taylor. It was the right course of action to say do Tobin because it's frustrating for us. We're sitting here. But as everything else in the AFC North is crumbling down, maybe the Bengals lucked into this, man. Maybe by being the old insular mom-and-pop shop organization that they are, they somehow lucked into having the best course forward. Which is, there's discord in Cleveland, there's discord in Baltimore, there's discord in Pittsburgh. There's a little bit of discord here, but we're still going to run it back with Joe. We've got one thing to fix, and that's that defense. They got a top 10 pick. They got a lot of money. And they've got an entire coaching staff coming back. So I could argue, might not win the argument, but you know what? We'd send the trial to a couple of days of deliberation. And we could sit here and we can go, hey, it's frustrating, no doubt. But is this team kind of are they favored to win the AFC North next year? I like their chances. And while I wanted Zach Taylor gone, while I wanted Duke Taylor gone, I can't help but think that the Bengals kind of lucked into having the best situation going forward. Stone, you've always been pro Coach Taylor, Zach Taylor. I would say you're pretty anti Duke Tobin. We had Paul Daner on last week, and obviously Propaganda Paul, as they're calling him, because everyone was like, what are you talking about? They should have fired Zach. They should have. We understand this organization isn't the best well run, but we understand also in the NFL you can kind of luck into things sometimes. Do you think the Bengals kind of lucked into having the best situation going forward, or am I drinking the Kool-Aid too much?
You might be, but I'm drinking it with you. You look at this division. I mean, Pittsburgh, they don't have anything to build off of. And you and I were talking in our pre-show meeting. You would think that the right move for them would be to move off of Mike Tomlin. Like, you want to keep going 9-8, that's fine. Mike Tomlin's not going to bottom out and be the captain of a ship that wins 4 games. Like, that's not going to happen. But does it look like he's going to have any postseason success? No. They have no clue what they're doing at quarterback. They're going to put Bill Howard out there at quarterback next year? I don't know. They got old guys all over the place. And you made the point that they should maybe be favored but won't be. I mean, shouldn't they kind of be favored to win the division next year? I mean, third place schedule, the core's in place. You would think the defense is only going to get better, but we said that last offseason, and it certainly somehow got worse at the beginning of this year. But depending on what Baltimore does at the head coaching spot, I mean, if they bring in Bob Saleh and you don't have a good coordinator for Lamar Jackson, like, do you really think they're going to take a step in the right direction? So I don't know. I feel like with the third place schedule, like I mentioned, the Bengals are in a pretty good spot here going into next year, but obviously frustrating that, not playing right now.
Right, no, it is. I will say this when it comes to not playing here. You want a fun stat? You want a fun little stat? We love stats on this show. We say them so often. Here's a fun one. In the last decade, 10 years, the Ravens, Steelers, and Browns have a combined 4 playoff wins. Steelers have 0, Browns have 1, Ravens have 3. The Bengals, who've only made the postseason 2 times in that entire 10 years, have 5 playoff wins. So, it feels like everything's crumbling around the Cincinnati Bengals. It feels like the Bengals aren't heading in a great path, but you could argue, and you could win the argument so easily, that between whatever the heck's going up in Berea, Ohio, between Shedeur Sanders and firing Kevin Stefanski, with the Ravens calling John Harbaugh to let him know that he's fired, a $10 million job, they're hitting up his phone line, not bringing him in and giving the decency to tell him face-to-face, and then whatever the hell is going to happen in Pittsburgh, and even if they don't fire Mike Tomlin, we'll know they'll make the postseason next year. We just know they'll also lose by 30 because that's what the Steelers do. So, yeah, maybe, just maybe, the decision to hang on to Zach Taylor, the decision to hang on to Duke Tobin, while it was frustrating as hell last week, the Bengals might have just lucked into having the best situation going forward. They've got a franchise quarterback. They've got one of the greatest wide receivers the sport has ever seen, and a pretty good pairing with him. And they've got one problem to fix, and they've got a lot of assets to fix it. Can they do that this offseason? Call me naive, call me dumb, call me a homer. I don't care. I think I'll drink the Kool-Aid. All right, we're going to welcome in one of Chatterbox's best, host of Chatterbox Bengals, and
loosely. You're using that term loosely, Reed.
I think you're on it more than I think. Okay. And also does some Reds content as well. We're going to talk about both here. Craig Salin, the man from Memphis. Craig, how are you on this lovely Tuesday? You said 10:18 is the exact time in which you want to be brought on, and it is 10:18. So you are a man of your word. You are punctual as always.
Did we hit the 36 seconds is the real question. Did we go 10:18, 36? I think I'm a couple seconds early, but that's all right. We'll accept it. Close enough.
I will accept it.
I'll blame you for not killing time before bringing me on.
I'm very good at killing time. I don't know if I ever make sense, but I am good at killing and just demolishing time. All right, before I brought you on, I was talking about the Bengals. And This is a take that a week ago would be absolutely killed, but based off what we saw the Steelers do, yeah, put on that Bengals hat, because I'm going to ask you some Bengals.
Make sure where we were
going Bengals
start,
first.
You know?
We're going to go Bengals first. He's a man of many hats, as you'll see throughout this interview. The Bengals, based off the Steelers getting demolished last night, and they might be without, like we might find out in the next hour that they're getting rid of Mike Tomlin. The Ravens, they have an aging quarterback that I think we understand his skills aren't going to age. I mean, aging, he's younger than Joe Burrow, but we understand that his skills aren't going to age well, and they're going to be with a new coach. And then the Browns are the Browns. Am I crazy for thinking that the Bengals not only should be better next year, but they should be favored to win the AFC North?
I mean, I wouldn't be shocked. I think there's a lot of question marks to be answered in this division, right? You start with the Steelers, the reigning champions, and what they're going to do at the quarterback position. A lot of thought that Aaron Rodgers wanted to run it back one more year, but if Mike Tomlin doesn't come back, does Aaron Rodgers really want to go through a rebuild with a new head coach? I don't know that answer. It'll be interesting to see what direction the Ravens go with their head coaching search. We've heard a lot of different rumors and a lot of different names that they've interviewed. And are they going to go on the offensive side of the ball to try and develop Lamar Jackson into a more complete quarterback, we'll call him? Or are they going to go defensive side of the ball to try and return to the glory days that the Baltimore Ravens used to live in with the Super Bowl appearances and everything with Ray Lewis and Terrell Suggs and Ed Reed and everybody else? So, no, it's not crazy to think that the Bengals will be favored to win the division. I think a lot of those pundits and the people that make those decisions probably will lean towards Baltimore, regardless of what happens with the coaching search. But no, I don't think it's crazy to think that the Bengals should be right there with any other team in the division.
Is it you and I, since the Jets and Bears games, since the trade deadline, had been calling
rehash those.
No, I'm just saying, since those games, we'd been calling for Zach Taylor to lose his job. We've been calling for Duke Tobin to lose his job. We had Paul Dehner on last week, and we obviously did a post presser after Duke Tobin's presser. Is it fair to say that the Bengals kind of lucked in? As frustrating as it was when we found out that Zach Taylor and Duke Tobin were coming back, Is it crazy to say that the Bengals kind of lucked into the best situation here because that word that buzzword they wanted to use, continuity, in a division that's going to have no continuity, the Bengals are the ones that will have it. Did they luck themselves into having the best situation going forward?
I don't know that. I mean, I think the real question is, let's say that they had fired Zach Taylor, and you look at all the names that are now available or are expected to be available on the head coaching market. If we went into next season and your head coach was Mike McDaniel, or your head coach was Matt LaFleur, or your head coach was John Harbaugh, or your head coach was Mike Tomlin, would you feel better or worse about the team than you do today?
I'd feel better.
So did you luck into the best situation? Maybe. Did you luck into the best possible situation for the Cincinnati Bengals? Probably not. Probably not still. But again, they've got, a top 10 draft pick that they're going to hopefully be able to add to the defensive side of the ball. There's going to be a couple names available, hopefully. Obviously, you just never know what's going to happen in the draft, but hopefully there's a couple different options for them when they get up to the podium, and hopefully they can add to this defensive side of the ball and make it a strength again like they did when they went to back-to-back AFC championship games.
I don't know if it was a strength, that defensive side was.
It certainly wasn't a downfall.
No doubt. It wasn't what it was. But if you look, obviously in the postseason it played very, very well. But if you look at the regular season stats, they're middle of the pack in both seasons. 2022, I think they were top 10, like 9th. Regardless. Do we I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought there for a second.
The worst, I put it out on X yesterday. I was doing a mock draft, right? And I think legitimately ran across the worst possible scenario for the Bengals. And I was doing it on PFF. First two picks went chalk, right? Fernando Mendoza, Dante Moore. Then the Cardinals reached for Caleb Downs at 3. The Titans went Ruben Bain, 4. The Giants went Arvell Reese, 5. David Bailey went 7th to the Commanders. Peter Woods went 8th to the Saints. And the Bengals were left with basically nobody on the board. You were left with your choice of Sonny Styles, the linebacker from Ohio State, Jermod McCoy, who I saw this morning was mocked to the Bengals by a couple different mock drafts, the cornerback from Tennessee. Keldrick Falk is, as somebody on X pointed out to me, is somebody that the Bengals are probably going to fall in love with because of the athleticism, even though the production wasn't there. Delane, the quarterback from LSU, was there, and then Cassius Howell, the edge from Texas A&M, who, what I've seen on tape, looks amazing, but are you going to run it back with back-to-back edge rushers from Texas A&M in back-to-back drafts? Guess we'll see.
So how confident are you now doing that experiment? Because I think I asked you this on Friday too. I hold the opinion that where they're at, 10th pick, there's going to be obviously a few quarterbacks taken in front of them. I think the Kansas City Chiefs are certainly going to take an offensive player. So there's going to be some availability on that defense. How confident are you that the Bengals can get an impact player at that 10 spot?
Somebody will be there. Somebody will be there. It's just a question of who. In this mock draft, Carnell Tate didn't go in the top 10. Jordan Tyson from Arizona State didn't go in the top 10. Those are two guys that, depending on how things fall, could very easily fall in that top 10 range. Carnell Tate for sure is expected to be a top 10 pick. You know, it's interesting. They had things like Jeremiah Love to the Cleveland Browns, which doesn't really make a ton of sense when they just drafted Quinshon Judkins last year, unless they don't believe in his ability to bounce back. So a lot of this will be determined over the next month or two as head coaching candidates kind of fall in place and you get a better idea for what teams are going to prioritize. But I'm pretty confident they will have their choice of a couple different impact players. The question is, as always, whether or not they make the right pick for them based on who's going to be available, whether that's athleticism trait that they fall in love with, or if that's someone who actually produced at the college level.
It's interesting because you did that mock draft and it had Caleb Downs taken 3rd, right?
Yeah.
In the history of the NFL, there has only been one player drafted inside of the top 5. There's been 2 that have been drafted at 5, and it was Sean Taylor and Eric Berry. Shout out to AI for giving me that answer. So that's where I mean, like, obviously it's going to be an impact play. If he's there, that'd be fantastic. But I'm with you. I think there's going to be someone there that immediately impacts this defense. I don't know who it is. I just hope that it's the right pick. I just hope that it is an immediate impact player, someone that we don't have to wait and see, hey, he's going to take 2 years to be kind of a good player. No, we need him to kind of impact this defense. Doesn't need to be an all-pro, doesn't need a Pro Bowler, but he needs to be an impact starter from the get-go. And, you know,
with all due respect to Myles Murphy, to Shamar Stewart, the Bengals aren't in a position to be able to afford another project, right?
No doubt.
Whether that's Myles Murphy taking 3+ years to come around to be a producer like you wanted him to, Shamar Stewart missing a majority of his rookie season via injury, but even when he was on the field was not necessarily as disruptive as you would have hoped for a first-round pick at 17. So, at the end of the day, it all comes down to this whole concept of collaboration within the Bengals front office, and can they take the collaboration and make the right pick, or will they continue to fall in love with athleticism rather than actually prioritizing the production? And I don't know that we've seen or heard anything out of Duke Tobin or Zach Taylor or otherwise that would give me faith that they're going to adjust the way they evaluate talent at this point, is my only concern, Reed. I mean, Duke Tobin talked about keeping things similar, and it just feels like they're going to run back a very similar philosophy in this year's draft.
Well, that is frustrating, but it is worth noting that when you're drafting in the high teens, when you're drafting at the end of the first round, there is typically some defect in the player. And by defect, I mean you're not going to get the guy that both matches elite traits and elite production. Those guys go in the top 10 picks. When you're drafting in the late teens, like we did with Shamar Stewart, you're going for elite traits, not elite production. When you're getting Myles Murphy, elite traits, not elite production. Or you're going to go to guys like Dax Hill that we got at the end of the first round, where you're going to get a guy that was perceived to play a position that wasn't of high value, like a safety position that's that also needs some work. So when you're drafting in the top 10, it's a completely different ball game as opposed to when you're drafting in the late teens and you kind of got to guess. Either you're going to be like, hey, this guy doesn't have quite the traits, but he really gets after the quarterback at college. So we'll see. I'm holding confident. What round would make you frustrated for the Bengals to draft an offensive player? Like, do you want like the first 3, 4? Like, do you think it's literally just all in on the defensive side? Or are you okay with, say it's the 3rd round and there's someone there that is really attractive on the offensive side? Is it pretty, what's the word I'm looking for? Is it pretty black and white that you just want defensive players?
Oh, well, I don't think anything's black and white when it comes to the draft because you just never know how things are going to fall. What I'll say is that I probably did like close to 10 mock drafts yesterday on PFF just to try and change things up and see who's available at different positions and all of this throughout the course of the draft. The earliest I drafted an offensive player yesterday was the 3rd round, and I only did it once out of the 10 mock drafts that we had, and that was because that was just the position that was available at that point. There just wasn't any value, and there wasn't any value on the trades, because that's the other piece that this Bengals team has not really done historically is trade back in the draft, So let's say they get up to their 3rd round pick and there's not really a key defensive player available that makes sense in that spot. They're most likely to go with an offensive player there rather than trading back and adding more picks. So the 3rd is the earliest I've made it yesterday, but realistically, I said on our show last week that I would be upset if they drafted an offensive player in the first 3 rounds. I think the 4th is the earliest I would like them to go, but there's a scenario where I could see them going in the 3rd round and taking an offensive player.
All right.
But I also should say, Reed, like if they go and draft a wide receiver in the 3rd round, I'm going to be pissed, right? If they draft an offensive lineman, I can get away with it. Maybe even a tight end if the right fit is there.
Ooh,
if they go out and draft another wide receiver in the 3rd round, I'm going to be pretty upset.
You're not happy with our tight end room that has, at the current number, about 9 dudes in it between Drew Sample and Eric All and Tanner McLaughlin and just the entire darn room is tight end.
9 dudes, and you've heard of one of them, Reed.
That's right.
Well, you've heard of 2 of them because Drew Sample, of course. But
one of them I've heard of because he gives a lot of touchdowns to the opposing team and Noah Fant. So hopefully he's not back next year. But you're telling me Drew Sample isn't a household name? You're telling me that? Because I don't believe you.
I don't know.
Real
fans know. Real fans know that when Drew Sample touches the ball, the Bengals win.
That is a fact, except for when it happened in the Browns game when he got the ball early on in the game and they lost. All right, I'm going to ask you to switch the hats. I'm going to ask you some quite literally. I said, hey, get your hats ready because you wear man of many hats. So he's got to put on the Reds hat. So I've got to ask him some Reds questions. Pierce Johnson signed over the weekend, relief pitcher. A good pitcher, no doubt about it, has had some success. I think the numbers are out. Apologize if I'm off the mark entirely. It's $6 million, right around that range. Thoughts on this signing and thoughts on how this shapes the future of the Reds offseason?
Well, $6.5 million, and look, this is a team that I don't think we expected to have a whole lot more money in their cap space to begin with, right? Like $6.5 million might have been even more than we would have expected them to spend the entire remainder of the offseason. I think Pierce Johnson's a good add. There's no doubt about it. He's going to bring a quality arm to this bullpen that desperately needed a reliable middle of the bullpen guy. There's a lot of question marks, I guess we'll say, in the Reds bullpen in terms of depth. You look at guys like Tony Santillan, who became a workhorse last year. Can he continue that and do it again? Emilio Pagan is going to be 35 years old. Graham Ashcraft had an up and down year. So we'll see. They want to rely on Connor Phillips as a late inning guy again. I just don't know if you can go into the season relying on that. But then the back of the bullpen still, Sam Mull, Yasver Zulueta are kind of leading the way right now in terms of who you'd expect to be in that bullpen. And maybe Zach Maxwell or Luis May fight for spots there as well. But they needed consistency and they needed reliability. Last year, Terry Francona fell in love with Scott Barlow. It certainly feels like this year Pierce Johnson is going to fit into that kind of role in terms of the guy that Tito goes to. But in terms of how it shapes the rest of the offseason, I said it yesterday. I think there's a couple things that Reds fans need to be ready to acknowledge. The first is that there's not a single free agent bat remaining within the Reds payroll projections that moves the needle, right? Like if you want to talk about a guy like Harrison Bader or Luis Renifo or any of those guys, sure. But there's not a single bat really that moves the needle in terms of getting people excited for this team. So the question is going to be, are they willing to trade a starting pitcher to go out and get a bat, which everybody feels like is the one thing that is missing from this team, is a middle of the lineup bat. So how does it shape the rest of the offseason? I think, quite frankly, they're probably done. If I'm being completely honest, you might get a non-roster invitee, like a veteran starting pitcher or a veteran bullpen arm, but I don't think there's another significant signing on the Reds' horizon for this offseason.
All right, that's interesting. Listen, I think I asked someone in our Discord this morning, I said, how much money have the Reds committed to their bullpen this year? And they said around $21 million. I don't know if that number's exact, but I think that off the top of my head, that feels pretty fair. On a team that pretty clearly needed some offensive firepower, for them to first and foremost spend $20+ million in a small market with the budget that they have, does that frustrate you as a fan that that's where they're spending their money? Not that the bullpen doesn't matter, but $21 million, $6 million to a sixth inning guy, like that doesn't seem
half
like
of it
filling
is
the
going
holes.
to Emilio Pagan. Half of that is going to Emilio Pagan. He signed for $10 million, right? Like Emilio Pagan was great for the Reds last year. And the tough thing is that in today's age, like pitchers are expensive. And I think we've learned that over the course of the last couple of years. You look at Nick Martinez earning $20+ million. You look at what the free agent market is expected to be for guys like Brady Singer next year. And the realization is that pitching is expensive. And so am I surprised that they spent $20 million on the bullpen? I don't think so. It was one of the key areas that you knew they needed to add. The problem is that in order to truly compete, they need to spend another $20 million on a bat. And I think the frustrating part is that we all know that won't happen. And so I'm not necessarily upset or surprised that they spent the kind of money that they did in the bullpen. I think Terry Francona and this front office loved that they could rely on Emilio Pagan to go out there and be their late inning guy. And so they brought him back. He wanted to come back, so it made sense for both parties. But between him and Pierce Johnson, you're looking at $16.5 million on the books next year. Will those two guys bring you more wins than a Kyle Tucker or some other free agent bat that's available? Kyle giving an extra $5 million to Kyle Schwarber.
You said Kyle Tucker first. I was like, I don't think the Reds were ever in the Kyle Tucker kind of sweepstakes.
No, they weren't. But again, it's just a conversation of where could that money be spent, right? And Kyle Tucker probably is never in the conversation, but at the same time, somebody has to be in the conversation. And whether it's you want to talk about Kyle Tucker or you want to talk about Cody Bellinger or you want to talk about Bo Bichette, Bo Bichette, $25 to $30 million, probably. Would you rather spend $16.5 million on those two guys, or would you rather go sign Gino Suarez? I don't know.
It's no, certainly there's a lot more name cachet when you get a Gino Suarez than you would for a Pierce Johnson and an Emilio Pagan, with all due respect to the bullpen. But as we know, watching a team that has a bad bullpen is perhaps the most frustrating thing as a baseball fan. It's like watching a football team without a good kicker. It's very frustrating. It's not the end all be all of the team, but it's very, very frustrating. Do you think it's possible that as we get closer to spring training, some of these free agents get a little more desperate, that the Reds make some kind of move and they make an actual decent splash, and Rhys Hoskins an older guy. I don't know. Paul Cole. I'm just throwing out names that are free agents. Do you think it's possible that the Reds try to snipe someone late in the free agency, and then if they have to make a move, dump some money somewhere else, that they will do that? Do you think that's a possibility or are you pretty steadfast in your opinion that it's done?
It feels done, if I'm being honest. Like,
okay.
We talked about it before that Rhys Hoskins felt like a good target maybe for the Reds. But, he's projected to make like $7 million. And even if it gets late in the season, like realistically, can you talk him into a 1-year deal at $5 million? Like, I just, even if that's the case, I don't know if the Reds have that in their budget. And here we are, we're what, less than a month away from pitchers and catchers reporting to spring training. I just don't know that that's going to happen. And, maybe you could have talked me into Max Kepler before the suspension. You've got Rhys Hoskins still out there, Michael Conforto out there. Let's be honest. I think the most realistic, like, late ad guy that's still out there is Miguel Andujar. He gave the Reds really quality innings last year on as a DH and as a bat. But, like, does that really get you excited for the Red season to say, oh, we're running it back with Miguel Andujar on a 1-year, $4 million deal? Like,
I think I can speak on behalf of Reds fans and say, no, it doesn't.
This is the thing that, and I said this about the Reds trade deadline last year as well, Reed, is that when you look at the moves in a vacuum, the Reds make fine moves. Like, the moves are fine. The trades that the Reds made last year at the deadline, they were fine. They made the team better. But when you look at the totality of the situation, you look at the Reds' full picture, you look at the division, you look at the landscape of professional baseball, you're just kind of unmoved by all of it, because it's fine. Like, fine is just the word to describe the Reds, and it fits into the full mediocrity that we've come to expect from this team.
It is encouraging to see them not. A good process as a front office is to look at every move and say, does this make our team better? And not just overly rely on what this team needs, because then other holes pop up. To just ask yourself, does this make our team better? And the Reds, like as you mentioned, they do that. Like, they do add marginally better players, and you got to think, if you're marginally getting better, then eventually you'll be a consistent team. But we just haven't seen that. And I've mentioned this before. The reason the Reds' offense is in the state that it is isn't because you can pin it on Jamier Candelario. You can pin it on whoever you want. The real reason is they just haven't developed great hitters internally in 15 years. Like, they haven't. Like, ever since the Jay Bruce, Todd Frazier, Joey Votto era of people coming up, they haven't developed great hitters here in Cincinnati, and they need to get back to those ways if they want to have a good lineup once again. Now, we mentioned that the Reds haven't made any impact bats, but are we forgetting that over the weekend they signed Michael Toglia to a minor league deal? Does that not move the needle for you, Craig? Does Michael Toglia, who is a career Colorado Rocky with an OPS plus at 75, playing a lot of games at Coors Field and couldn't project as a good hitter at Coors Field, does that not move the needle for you?
He was a better hitter away from Coors Field. Explain that one, Reed.
High elevation, can't breathe as well. He just not getting as much oxygen to the brain. That's the medical.
No, look, if we're adding another CES to the mix. Like, sure, from a super depth position, it makes sense. I think that Michael Toglia has. I'm not going to call it a high ceiling. Like, let's not get carried away here, Reed. But, like, could he be a serviceable bat from the left-handed side of the plate? Maybe. But, like, is he really going to be an everyday player? Is he going to be anything more than a depth piece down at AAA? And then let's play the other piece of that. Okay, you put him down at AAA. Who's he taking at bats from? CES not going to play? I think the question that I don't know yet, right? We won't know until spring training or maybe even once we get into the season. Do they move CES to third base Tolia plays first base, and CES is kind of the insurance policy for if and when Ke'Bryan Hayes hurts his back again this year. And then that way they have somebody ready to step in for Ke'Bryan Hayes, both offensively and defensively, to give them a spark versus whoever else is their depth piece at third base. I guess Sal Stewart could be, but I really want him to just focus on first base and improving his defense there.
Mm-hmm.
Like, other than that, I don't know what the answer is at third base if Ke'Bryan Hayes were to get hurt.
It's gonna be an interesting season. There's absolutely no doubt about that. Just because of where the Reds are at, and it's just someone. I am confident, optimistic even, that someone will step up, that you are relying to step up. A Sal Stewart having an incredible year. Matt McClain getting back to 2023 Matt McClain. Ellie De La Cruz getting back to, where he was at the first half of last season before, kind of a lingering injury kind of took its toll on him. So I am confident that the Reds will get a big boost from one of those players. It's just I don't know if it's enough. I don't know if it's going to be enough to keep this team in contention, especially with the Chicago Cubs just being the wagon that they are.
Every argument, every time I post something on X, the argument that I get back is, well, you've got a full year of Sal Stewart. You've got CES, who hopefully can take a step. You've got Matt McClain on his second year back from injury. You've got all of these things that could go the Reds' way. But we also saw last year the way that they could go for some of these players. And we talk about ceiling elevators, and I mentioned it with JJ Bleday. Like, I think it's a high ceiling move, but the Reds' floor is so astronomically low compared to what I think a lot of fans think their floor is this year that it really worries me. Now, do I really think that they're going to go out and win 65, 70 games? No, I don't. I think their pitching will carry them beyond that. But the truth of the matter is that offensively, if you put this on a different team with a different pitching staff, we would be talking about things like the Rockies last year, where they won 40 something games.
Right.
Like, you look at the St. Louis Cardinals. I don't know that the floor for this Reds team is really that much higher than the floor of the St. Louis Cardinals. I just don't.
So you're saying without the pitching staff that they had, if they had a mediocre pitching staff, this is a team that is destined for 60 wins. It's their between their starting rotation and their bullpen that even gets them sniffing contention into making the postseason.
I think the pitching staff is the primary reason they're in contention. I think the floor is a terrible 60-win team. I don't think that's what's going to actually happen, but I do believe that offensively, a lot of people are relying, as you're saying, on these bounce-back seasons from guys who haven't shown consistency ever. And so, yes, absolutely, Matt McClain has the ceiling to be an astronomical addition to this team compared to what he was last year. But until we see it, why are we relying on that?
If this team goes in that direction, starts off this year terribly, as they've started many years in the past, where they're just not very good for the first 2 months, and we get to the beginning to middle of July, and this team appears to be on pace for high 60s wins, at the best low 70s wins. They're a 90-plus loss team. Could you see them, I don't want to say blowing it up, but could you see them getting rid of some pieces that are currently perceived to be a part of the future? Guys like Hunter Green, guys like Nick Lodolo, guys like that. Could you see the Reds kind of pivoting and trying to recoup some talent elsewhere?
I think the guys you'd expect them to move are Tyler Stevenson, Brady Singer, guys towards the end of their contract. I don't think that they are going to blow up their philosophy.
Not a complete pivot. Just guys that are going to be gone.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah. I think they are too set in their ways and too firm in their beliefs that they have to build through the farm and through their young guys, that It just wouldn't happen. There's no way that they would ever do that. So, the positive thing for this Reds team is that their schedule at the start of the second half of the season is really easy. Like, they need to start the second half really hot because the second half of the second half is impossible.
When you say the start of the second half, do you mean like game 82 or do you mean after the All-Star break?
After the All-Star break.
Okay.
All-Star break. So they go into the All-Star break against, Baltimore, Philly, and then the Cubs. But then they come out of the All-Star break. They get Colorado, they get Seattle, but then they get St. Louis, Cleveland, Pittsburgh, the Athletics, Washington, the White Sox, Miami, St. Louis, Arizona, and then they get San Francisco again, and then it changes. You get the Cubs, San Diego, Milwaukee, the Dodgers, the Cubs, the Braves, the Blue Jays. The last month and a half of the season is a gauntlet for these Reds. And so if they're not already at 75 to 80 wins by the time they get to the end of August, it's really hard to see this team going into the playoffs with momentum. For sure.
You scared at all about the Buccos?
Define scared.
Do you think they're a viable team to challenge for a wild card?
I
don't think they can win the division, but could they challenge for the wild card?
I think they could. If Jared Jones bounces back from his Tommy John surgery, I don't know what his timeline is for return, if he's going to be ready for the start of the season or if he'll be back later in the season. But if he bounces back along with the young pitching that they have in place, obviously Paul Skeens is one of, if not the best pitchers in baseball. Jared Jones, Bubba Chandler, like all these guys that are.
So you got Mitch Keller, right?
Yep. Mitch Keller.
They have the number one prospect, shortstop.
You talk about the Reds and their pitching staff carrying them into competition. Like Pittsburgh absolutely has the ability to do that as well. So yeah, I don't think they're going to go out and win the division, but they could very easily finish third and finish ahead of the Reds. Very easily.
All right, fair enough. Craig Sandlin, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for hopping on last week with the live stream after the Duke Tobin presser, talking Bengals, talking Reds. It's been a lot of fun here talking with you, Craig. Thank you so much.
Yes, sir. Talk to you later.
Yeah, see you, Craig. All right, that was good. I thought he had some really interesting things about the Reds. I like gauging where fans are at regarding the Reds because sometimes it's easy, similar to Bengals fandom. It's easy to just stick to the volatile opinions, but sometimes being level-headed about it. And one thing that I thought, and listen, is it a little in jest? Is it a little tongue-in-cheek for me to continually bringing up the Buccos? Sure. But when you look at the Pirates and you look at where the Reds are at, they're similar trajectories to where like the same reason you would be optimistic about the Reds fits very in line with what's going on there at PNC Park. So while their offense, it was significantly worse last year, it could be better. The Brewers, once again, on paper, doesn't have a roster that surprises you. I think the Cardinals are not going to be good at all. They're pivoting for a future. And then obviously the Cubs made some big splashes, projected to win 90 games or something like that. So it's going to be an interesting year in the NL Central. I truly do believe that someone, Matt McClain, even a CES, like someone that you expect to, a Noel Marte, a Sal Stewart, to take a significant stride offensively this season will do that. The question is can the others hold serve? Can Ellie get back to where he was 2 years ago? Can Matt McClain get back to 20? Can TJ Friedel continue to do what he's doing? Can Spencer Steer, though I like to talk bad about him, there's no doubt that he's at the very least average hitter. Can he continue to provide some pop in the middle to back end of your order? Can those things happen for the Reds? And if they do, it's not hard to find the optimism. Though I would say a team with the budget of the Reds spending $20+ million on their bullpen is a little head-scratching while not making considerable moves to their lineup, which was the reason that they got bounced so early and why they weren't able to take really a big step last year. But we'll see. We'll see. The best part about a baseball season, it's long. You get plenty of time to iron out details. You get plenty of time to iron out questions. And I was curious, if the Reds are really bad, what does a sell July look like? And yeah, you're going to get rid of Brady Singer. You're going to get rid of Tyler Stevenson. But do you move off of one of these starting pitchers that can bring in a pretty decent return and recoup some talent? That's the question I'm worried about. Stone, anything strike you about what Craig said about the Cincinnati Reds and the offseason that they've had?
He thinks they're done, which I don't disagree with him. I believe him, but when you look at the scope of the offseason and all the things that we said going into the offseason, like literally just get one bat, and you couldn't get one. That really frustrates you, certainly as a fan. And it seems like they're just banking on Matt McClain bouncing back and banking on Ellie taking that next step, which if those things happen, it could be really, really good for you. But not switching it up whatsoever and adding one bat, a guy that can hit some home runs, it's hard to imagine that this thing doesn't look very similar to how it did last year, which is frustrating in this city because the Bengals did similar stuff, right? Last offseason, didn't address the defense. The defense still stunk. We're sitting here like, well, here we are again. It kind of feels like the Reds are headed in that direction too, which obviously is maddening.
All right, fair enough. Yeah, it's just Pierce Johnson spending $6 million, the Reds, for a guy. I mean, listen, if he's great, if he's done what he's done last year, then he's worth the money. It's just interesting to see where their lineup's at and spending that kind of money on a sixth inning guy. It doesn't hold. As I mentioned before, having a bad bullpen it's on par with having a bad kicker. Like, is it the most important thing on your team? No. I think we can all agree on that. Like, having a good kicker, while it's great, as Bengals detractors like to tell me, it's the reason the Bengals won 5 playoff games. But is it more important than a good offensive line? No. Is it more important than a good defensive line? No. Is it more important than a good receiving group? No. Is it more important than a good secondary? No. It's important. Similar to, is a bullpen better than a good rotation? No. Is it better than a good infield? No. Is it better than a good outfield? No. But it's important. You need it to be a fully functional team. I mean, that was the biggest thing about the Dodgers going into their postseason, was like, is their bullpen good enough? And it proved more than capable. More than capable. Stone, I didn't get a chance to ask you, and we'll round out the finale of this show. As someone who loves the Bengals, maybe even more so than I do, and as someone who hates the Steelers, maybe so more than I do, your take on the Texans-Steelers game last night, because it was a lot of fun to watch that fourth quarter.
Well, one, I was wrong. I thought the Steelers were going to be able to hang around, which they were able to do. But, I mean, C.J. Stroud, man, what in the world was that? 4 fumbles in the first half, lost 2 of them. And then the interception, just a complete donation to Pittsburgh there. So C.J. Stroud and the Texans offense did everything in their power to try to keep Pittsburgh in it, and they still weren't able to do it. We've been saying all year how some of these defenses in the NFL are really, really incredible. Denver, Seattle, certainly in the mix, but Houston is a notch above everybody else. That defense is fast, physical, violent, and when you're the Pittsburgh Steelers and you lack weapons on the outside and the offensive line couldn't really hold up for Rodgers either, you're going to be in a world of trouble. That's what happened. So much rather be the Cincinnati Bengals than the Pittsburgh Steelers, I think, at this point. Would have been great to make the playoffs, sure, but where do you go next year if you're Pittsburgh? The Bengals at least have an idea of where they're going and where they should be at.
I think the Steelers just, like, I don't see the path to where they're contending at all. Like, I don't – if they run it back, they'll win 9-10 games. There's no doubt about that. They run it back with Mike Tomlin. Aaron Rodgers comes back. But does anyone think this team can be a 12, 13-win team and make serious noise in the postseason? No. So if you feel like the peak of where you can be as a team is win 10 games and get trounced in the wild card round, why are you running it back? When we as Bengals fans should know that better than anyone. The 5 straight playoff games that we did with Andy Dalton. The only one where we really could have made some noise was that 2015 team. Oh, and Andy wasn't there. We had A.J. McCarron. Like, that team was stacked, but we're without their starting quarter. I don't understand. The Steelers got to pivot. They've got an old, declining defense. They've got a 40-year-old quarterback who might even come back. And they've got a coach that hasn't won a playoff game in over 10 years. And while it's truly incredible, I don't like to disparage the fact that Mike Tomlin has never had a losing season. Like the Steelers have not had a losing season since 2003. That is, in this sport, truly incredible. You get credit for that. But also, it doesn't get to keep your job. You don't get to keep your job for that. It's amazing, but we got to see something in the postseason. And while I like what I'm seeing in the postseason from the Steelers over the past about 8 years, it's just not. You just got to pivot. You just got to move to where I certainly was against the Ravens. Like if I'm a Ravens fan, I'd certainly be against them getting rid of John Harbaugh. If I was a Browns fan, I would certainly be against them getting rid of Kevin Stefanski. If I'm a Steelers fan, then you have every right to be tired of the Mike Tomlin stuff. And it's interesting. I asked Stone 3 months ago, I was like, do you think anybody in the AFC North will lose their job this year? And I think we both agreed, like, maybe one guy will lose his job, but we will see. And it appears that we are more than I think it's more likely than not that Mike Tomlin loses his job. So if that's the case, 3 head coaches losing their job, which once again gives me optimism for the Bengals that we somehow lucked into. And that's the only maybe is a pessimistic view on the Cincinnati Bengals, but the only way that we are going to continue doing some winning in this town is just lucking into things. And while it might not be better for the long-term plan of the Cincinnati Bengals, it certainly is better for 2026, the continuity. So we will see. We got a great offseason ahead of us. Stone, I forget, is there anybody coming on the show here on the 11 o'clock hour?
Not today. Just me and the fine folks that tune into what we're doing, going back and forth for an hour. But, yeah, we'll have guests later in the week, but nothing today.
All right, fair enough. Your thoughts on the Alex Bregman signing as the Bengals, as the Cubs fan?
Right. Weren't the Cubs in the mix this time last year for him?
They were. Yeah, they weren't. The reason that they've gone after him for 2 straight years is they really like the leadership quality that he presents. And from what I've heard from podcasters and stuff, the reason they were frustrated with Kyle Tucker's leadership, and that's why there's really been no effort at all to bring back Kyle Tucker. And he was probably out of their price range anyways, which is sad to say for the Cubs. But they brought back Alex Bregman. The question is do they, because they already had a full infield between Matt Shaw, Nico Horner, Dansby Swanson, and Michael Bush. What happens with either Nico Horner or Matt Shaw? I think that they will probably part ways with Matt Shaw here, which I put this in the Discord last night. If I were the Reds, I'd call up Matt Shaw, see if we can get Matt Shaw and get rid of Key Brian Hayes, because Matt Shaw's a great defender. He's not a Key Brian Hayes type defender, but he's a great defender, and he's actually got some pop in his bat. And then you could clear up some cap space to go get another bat. So while it's not likely to happen, we will see.
He hit some bombs at GABP too.
He would hit bombs. Yeah. He would hit bombs. It's interesting because the Cubs are finally going over the payroll tax, luxury tax threshold, which they have not tried to do in years past, which is once again crazy to say. They don't like being a top 10 payroll in baseball, even though they probably make the 3rd most money behind the Dodgers and the Yankees. Maybe the Red Sox make more money. Maybe the Mets make more money. But yeah, we'll see. All right, that's my Cubs rant for the day. See you guys. Stone Shield Show coming up.
All right, here we go. Welcome into the Stone Shield Show. My name is Stone Shields. We are here. We are live. It is Tuesday, January 13th. Appreciate everybody hanging out with us here this morning through Off the Bench into my show. No guests today. We will have a couple of special guests later in the week. Certainly looking forward to that, but just me and you here on a Tuesday. Lots I want to discuss. Obviously, at this time of the year, NFL starting to wind down a little bit. We're still knee-deep in the playoffs, but we can begin to have those conversations about vacant job openings, right? 8 head coach openings here at this point as we are live. Is there a possibility the Steelers' job becomes open? I think there certainly is a possibility. Packers perhaps could become open as well. Eagles may be into that mix additionally, but for now we have 8 spots. We'll talk about some names that are being floated around for all 8 spots. We'll kind of rank them as well here on the show, so we'll talk about that. We'll talk about the game last night. Was wrong on that one. Thought the Steelers were going to be able to hang around and ultimately prevail, certainly cover the number in the game. That didn't even come close to happening as they get blown out and embarrassed at home. We're able to kind of hang in the game for a while thanks to C.J. Stroud and some incompetence from the Texans offensively, but we'll talk about that game certainly. And also we'll open with the Cincinnati Bengals as we typically do. Some rumors about Dan Pitcher. Could he perhaps be on the move? Only has really been tied to one head coach opening, but do the Bengals have a backup plan in place if they lose their offensive coordinator? Well, I don't think it would surprise many of us if they do not. But appreciate everyone as always. Make sure you hit that subscribe button if you haven't done so already. We are well on our way to 22,000 subscribers here at the channel. Let's try to hit that goal by the end of January. We're about halfway through the month here in the new year, the year of our Lord, 2026. And let's see if we can hit that mark by the end of this month. Help us out. Subscribe to the YouTube channel and subscribe to our podcast as well, wherever you get the podcast. Apple, iHeart, Spotify, you name it, you can find us. Make sure you check us out. And as always, like the stream as well. That certainly helps additionally. But let's start with the Cincinnati Bengals. Let's start with this Dan Pitcher conversation. I kind of expected him to get a little bit more buzz than he has as it relates to him being a head coach somewhere else throughout his career. Reportedly, here at this point, he has only interviewed with one other team, and that team is the Cleveland Browns. And when that news came across the wire last week or whenever it was kind of the least surprising thing that I saw that day, certainly. It just seems like Cleveland, when they have openings, they're always looking to the Bengals and interviewing some candidates over there. Of course, we remember Hugh Jackson ending up taking that job in Cleveland after serving as the play caller for Marvin Lewis's offense for several years. But Pitcher interviews with Cleveland. They've got a lot of names that we'll talk about throughout the course of this show that they're in conversations with here at this point. I think Mike McDaniel in a lot of ways viewed as the favorite. Harbaugh apparently has some connections there. Todd Monken, Jim Schwartz, along with, of course, Dan Pitcher and Tommy Rees are kind of the hot names right now for the Cleveland Browns. But I think Pitcher deserves a lot of credit. He came in with Zach Taylor back in 19 and really has done a nice job of working his way up the staff, was the quarterback coach for a long time, and it was kind of a seamless transition when Brian Callahan ended up getting the head job over at Tennessee. That Pitcher, of course, became the offensive coordinator for the Cincinnati Bengals. And the word collaboration is a word that has been used a lot as it relates to the Cincinnati Bengals. Certainly Duke Tobin throwing that word out there, talking about his scouting staff and how they handled the decision-making process before ultimately they make moves in free agency and make decisions on draft day there as well. Well, play calling here in Cincinnati allegedly is pretty collaborative there as well between Zach Taylor, Dan Pitcher, and the rest of the offensive staff. And I think Pitch has really done a tremendous job. I think Zach deserves a lot of credit for the play calling, but Pitcher's certainly in his ear helping orchestrate the offense, and it's by no means just Zach Taylor steering that ship in the right direction. So the Dan Pitcher experience here over the course of the past couple of years has been really, really good. Now, is he reaping the benefits of having Joe Burrow? Certainly. But what happened when Joe Burrow wasn't out there? Obviously, it was ugly with an incompetent quarterback in Jake Browning, but things looked pretty good for Joe Flacco in the Bengals offense when he was out there leading the charge for Cincinnati, despite the fact it didn't result in many wins, only one win for this organization during that time period. But I'm a fan of Dan Pitcher. I think he deserves some of this attention that he's getting from the outside, and we'll see. I think there's probably a greater chance that he is back here in Cincinnati. But remember, this is a guy that interviewed for the offensive coordinator spot with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers last offseason, right? To make a move like that, you and I, it seems kind of like a lateral move, right? But Zach Taylor, of course, calling the plays here in Cincinnati, and if he were to have gone to Tampa last year under a defensive-minded guy in Todd Bowles, he would have had, all the play calling say as it relates to that. But he stays put. Not sure if he was even offered the job last year with Tampa, but certainly interesting that he went and interviewed for it. He stays here in Cincinnati, but I'm sure he loves being here with the Bengals. As far as, being with Joe Burrow, being with Zach Taylor, he's been with this organization for several years. But I don't think it's out of the realm of possibilities that he could potentially leave for another offensive coordinator spot if it's not an offensive-minded head coach in place that is calling the plays. Seems like a lateral decision there, and to leave Joe Burrow to you and I seems crazy. But especially, if he's not going to get more attention as far as being a head coach candidate, might need to find himself in a position where he's calling the plays to really have that go his way. Of course, it broke Brian Callahan's way. He was able to get the Tennessee job. That was kind of a disaster, but I don't think Callahan really had much to work with here at that point. But it'll be interesting to see if any other teams enter kind of into the mix for Dan Pitcher. And, the whole point of me bringing this up is you start to worry about, okay, who's going to be your guy if you lose Dan Pitcher here at this point. So we'll bring around a couple of names. The Bengals pretty much love working from within and kind of promoting guys from within. That's, of course, what they did with Dan Pitcher when Brian Callahan left, and they've done that previous years as well under Zach Taylor and other head coaches. So there's a couple of guys on the staff. Brad Craigthorpe, of course, is the quarterback's coach for the Cincinnati Bengals. I believe he's 33 years of age. He's been here for a while as well under Zach Taylor, kind of just an offensive assistant at first, and then I think he was an assistant wide receivers coach, works his way up to quarterback coach. I kind of feel like he would be next in line for that offensive coordinator spot, right? Would the Bengals go out there and pay some top-of-the-line OC to come in here, especially if Zach Taylor's calling the plays? I don't really see that happening. So I think the most likely option for Cincinnati would be to promote from within. In a lot of instances, whatever industry you're talking about, that's not always the best thing to do, right? If you have a big-time job come open, which offensive coordinator in the NFL is a huge job, you probably want to widen your search a little bit. Look a little bit outside the building to make sure you are bringing in the best possible guy. But the circumstances here in Cincinnati, the money that they are hesitant to spend on a coaching staff, and the fact that their head coach is an offensive-minded dude that calls the plays, and Zach Taylor, I don't think it would surprise many people if they just promoted from within. Now, I happen to have a lot of belief in Brad Craigthorpe. We've heard Joe Burrow speak very highly of him in the past, so I don't think it would be the worst thing in the world. I think Craigthorpe at some point is destined to be an offensive coordinator in this league, and at some point, Pitcher's going to be gone, right? This isn't, he's not going to roll this thing out for his whole career with Joe Burrow being the quarterback here in Cincinnati. We all look at this offense and go, it's not going anywhere, right? If Joe Burrow, if Nine's out there and he's healthy, it's not going out anywhere. So Pitcher, it's only a matter of time before he gets a head coaching job. Maybe it's not this cycle. Again, Cleveland, I believe, is the only team kind of in the mix for him at this point. But at some point, you're going to have to replace him, and it just kind of feels like Craigthorpe would be the most realistic option for Cincinnati. You won't have to pay him as much. You kind of just promote him. He's been around for a long time. He understands the system. He understands what Zach Taylor wants to do. And, that's what the Bengals have done in the past, kind of just promote from within, which, again, I don't think is the best decision in the world. But when you're talking about the Cincinnati Bengals and talking about a guy that I have a lot of belief in Craigthorpe, that could be the answer going forward. Hopefully that's not something that has to happen this offseason, and Pitch will be back with this team, but certainly something that I think people need to keep an eye on because, it's kind of floating under the radar here. But I was surprised that more teams aren't interested in Dan Pitcher. And another name, of course, is Justin Riscotti, a pass game coordinator for Cincinnati. He came in, I believe, a year or two ago, so he hasn't been here throughout the whole Zach Taylor process, but apparently within the building, Riscotti is highly respected. He's a few years older, certainly, than Craigthorpe. Has been around the league a little bit, has been on, a part of some more different teams, so I think he could be another potential guy as well to monitor as it relates to just kind of promoting from within. And then there's some other names out there, and I'm not going to throw around the Mike McDaniels of the world. We'll talk about him in a little bit here as we kind of talk about this head coaching buzz around the National Football League. But, some realistic names that Cincinnati potentially could go after if they don't decide to promote from within. I think the top guy is Brian Callahan. right? I was surprised when he got fired from Tennessee that he wasn't here in Cincinnati as some kind of analyst or assistant or up in the booth somewhere. I thought he would be back here. He hasn't been to this point. He just interviewed for the Tampa OC spot. I got a lot of love and respect for Brian Callahan. I think there were some people here in Cincinnati that didn't want to give him his flowers when he was here kind of overseeing the offense. Again, Zach Taylor calling the plays, so I think people are hesitant to crown the offensive coordinator. That's not even technically calling the plays. I understand that. But Callahan, I think, did a tremendous job, was deserving of an opportunity as a head coach. But for him, some of these guys, when it comes to being a head coach in the NFL, are kind of one and done. Right, I think Robert Saleh, Mike McDaniel, guys like that, Kevin Stefanski are going to get multiple opportunities to be a head coach, but I don't know if Brian Callahan strikes me as that guy. He had to take the job, right? You don't turn down. It wasn't like everybody wanted Brian Callahan. I think it was kind of a surprise that Tennessee went with him, so he would have been silly to reject that job. But when you're in a spot like that, you don't have many resources. You got a bad roster, as simple as you can put that, right? And yeah, that puts yourself in a challenging spot. And ultimately, as time ran its course, and they only won a handful of games, and they moved off him. So when something goes that badly and you're a head coach, I wouldn't expect you to get another opportunity to be a head coach. But as far as an OC in this league, absolutely, I think that's something he'll be able to do for a long time. And I don't think that would surprise any of us, right? We kind of saw with Al Golden, right? He was on the staff with Taylor, the linebackers coach. Then eventually the DC job becomes open. They go back to him. Callahan did a great job as the OC here. Gets fired. Would it surprise anybody if he was back as the offensive coordinator here with the Bengals? Not me whatsoever. And you saw it in San Francisco, right? Robert Saleh, guy we just mentioned. The Jet job, that's a mess of an organization. Didn't really have a chance there. Where does he go? Right back to where he came from as the defensive coordinator for the San Francisco 49ers. So I think that would be the top name, right? And that kind of almost feels like promoting from within because he was here for such a long time. And some other names, Todd Monken. The Baltimore staff is fascinating because, they decide to move off Harbaugh, and then Monken, of course, leaves too. And then all of a sudden you got a guy in Harbaugh who's clearly the most highly coveted head coach here this cycle. And I think Todd Monken's going to be getting some head coach love a little bit here as well. Apparently Cleveland interested in him, but he's a surefire offensive coordinator somewhere as well. So, that could be a potential name that you monitor. But again, a guy like that to come in and then not call the plays because Zach's going to be doing it, hard to imagine he would take a job here in Cincinnati. And two other names, Cliff Kingsbury and Brian Daboll. We've poked fun at Cliff Kingsbury a lot. He gets fired as the OC with the Commanders after taking him to the conference championship or helping take them to the conference championship the previous year. Kingsbury, by all accounts, seems like a good dude, likable guy. People always talk highly of him, but you look at all his trips, where he's been. I mean, has he ever really been good? He had Mahomes in college. I understand that roster, specifically on defense, was not good enough to compete, but didn't win enough games with Mahomes. What did he do in Arizona? That didn't really go very well. Certainly had some quarterback issues there with Kyler Murray, and he struggled staying healthy. But then, has the great year in Washington, and then it turns around and, can't do anything with a backup quarterback there, albeit they won their final game of the year against Philadelphia. At A&M, he had Johnny Football when he was a youngster, certainly. But I just feel like he gets so much attention about being some top-of-the-line OC and even getting some head coaching interviews, and that just kind of makes me scratch my head a little bit. But you can throw him on this list, probably going to get way too high of a salary for the Bengals to certainly entertain. And this one is interesting because, again, honestly, the Bengals are probably going to do this if pitcher moves off and goes somewhere else, probably just promote from within. But one guy that I would like to go out there and pay would be Brian Daboll. And I think there would be a world where he would come in and be the offensive coordinator and be okay with not calling plays, despite the fact, of course, he has called plays frequently throughout his career. But he's terrific as far as an offensive mind goes. I personally think, talking about some of these guys that get a second opportunity to be a head coach and some don't, I would give Daboll another opportunity. Maybe it's not this cycle, but down the line, certainly. His track record with developing quarterbacks and being kind of an offensive genius has been great. I mean, what he was able to do with Hurts at Alabama the one year he was there was tremendous. And Josh Allen, I mean, he's kind of known as the guy that fixed Josh Allen and really made him a really good player. And early with Jackson Dart, I think you saw him kind of jump in there and be ready to go. I think that speaks to coaching there as well. So we talked about how the Giants, you want to fire him at the end of the year, fine, but to fire him, mid-year and then keep the GM, I just thought that was a horrible decision. But Daboll's a guy to kind of keep an eye on because, again, he's going to garner a sizable contract. Bengals probably aren't going to do that. They're only paying their coach $4.5 million. But Daboll and Joe Burrow, I mean, this Bengals offense is talking about high functioning. It's about as high functioning as it gets. I think you maybe even tap into a higher level, as crazy as that sounds, if you bring in a guy like Daboll. But those are kind of, just names you're kind of throwing out there. That's probably not going to happen. They're going to probably promote from within. Top of the guy for them would be Brian Callahan, certainly, if they didn't promote from within. But I think we are also in a spot this year where you would think Pitch is going to be back. But you hope the Bengals have a backup plan if he were not, because I think he kind of flies under the radar. He's been a very important piece for this Bengals offense over the course of the past few years. A couple of more Bengals things I want to touch on before we transition into Pittsburgh and Houston. We've talked about this a little on the show, but Amarius Mims wants Dalton Risner to be back, and I'm looking at some of these quotes. He sat down, I believe, with James Rapine, or had a conversation with James Rapine, and basically banging the table like, I want to be next to Dalton Risner and Ted Karras going forward next year. And if you're the Bengals, shoot, make it happen. We haven't heard Joe Burrow be that vocal about Risner like he has been with some other guys in previous years, but these guys along the offensive line absolutely love Dalton Risner, and Risner made it very clear he wants to be here in Cincinnati. And I think there's a bit of a red flag, considering that you kind of signed him off the street right before the year, so the fact he was available is like, what's he doing being available then? But then you look what he was able to do on the field, and he was a really good player for Cincinnati, and this doesn't need to be sign him to some long-term deal. Just bring him back for next year, right? And I'm not opposed to these one-year contracts with guys. One, if you want to be successful in this league, you have to be open to doing that kind of stuff. And two, people joke about Burrow's line several years ago about the window being his whole career, but I truly believe that. You have to go into every season with the expectation that we're going to win the World Championship this year, and I think that's a realistic expectation to have when you have Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase, and T. Higgins in place, regardless of how bad things were defensively the previous year. So bringing him in on a one-year deal and then maybe drafting another guard in the third or fourth round, it looks like you hit on one in the third round last year with Dylan Fairchild. I think that would be a good decision for the Cincinnati Bengals. So we'll see if Duke Tobin and company mess around with that, if they drag this thing on longer than it needs to. But that to me is like, get this done right here, right now. Right? He's on the team. You don't have to wait. Just get it done as quickly as you can and save yourself some money in the process. You could probably afford to mess around and let this thing go later. I don't think there's going to be a bunch of teams that go after Dalton Risner, right? But, make him feel appreciative of what he was able to do, or make it feel as though you appreciate him, because you should, based on the season that he had this past year, and give him an opportunity to come back. Again, don't pay him some crazy contract, but one-year deal, come back here, be the starting right guard, and let's continue to roll. And draft somebody in the later rounds of the draft and hope you can find that next Cordell Volson that can, be your next starter, but hopefully, of course, play at a bit higher level than Cordell Volson. But very noteworthy that Mims is coming out and doing that. I'm not going to sit here and act like Mims has the amount of pull that Joe Burrow does, but if I'm the Bengals, I'm listening to Amarius Mims to some degree, right? Because he's a great player, and, I would already kind of put him here at this point, but, we talk about Trey Hendrickson kind of being the fourth best player for the Bengals behind the big three. I look at Amarius Mims as that guy for them right now. And, Jim Harbaugh was joking about this a couple of years at the draft when they asked him about, why didn't you go get a weapon in the draft when they got Joe Olden? He was like, well, we view offensive linemen as weapons. And that was kind of a cliche Harbaugh thing to say, but I kind of agree with him. Like, Amarius Mims, he's a weapon for this Bengals team. And, if the guy he's next to, if he's begging for him to come back, make it happen, especially when the guy wants to be here. Seems like everybody likes him. Bring Dalton Risner back for next year. Lastly, one other Bengals topic I want to touch on. Dane Brugler, draft analyst, has his beast that comes out every year, does a great job over at The Athletic, covering the NFL and the NFL draft. He put together his all-rookie team, and then he had honorable mentions. And I saw the first one, and I was like, okay, yeah, Dylan Fairchild, honorable mention. He deserves to be an honorable mention. Fought through some injuries, was able to stay available out there. I think, fair to say he was the weak link to the offensive line, but if you had to pick one, but seems to be poised to have a really solid career, and maybe he can be another guy that could potentially get a second contract here, because the joke has been the Bengals, it's been however long since they've given an offensive lineman a second contract. Mims is going to be that guy, but maybe after him it could be Fairchild. We'll see. Several years away, obviously, for Dylan Fairchild. But he had two other honorable mentions on there as well, and they were the linebackers, both of them, Demetrius Knight and Barrett Carter. And Demetrius Knight flashed the last two games against Arizona and Cleveland, right? It's my gut I would roll 2 new linebackers out there as the starter week 1 next year. I wouldn't be able to put either one of those guys on the field as the starter. My gut says they'll put Demetrius Knight out there, which I don't think necessarily is the end of the world. But Barrett Carter, all rookie, honorable mention. Did you watch any of the games? Again, Brugler's great, well respected in the industry, but I saw that and I was like, okay, good. Fairchild's on there, and I saw the other 2 guys were on there, and I'm like, what are we doing? what are we doing? Barrett Carter, honorable mention for what? One of the worst picks you could possibly pick. And apparently, he works hard, whatever. Give him credit for that. Apparently, he's a good dude. But Chris Welsh, when we had him on the show last week, I was talking about Matt McClain. Now he seems like a good dude. He goes, well, good dudes don't win pennants. Well, good dudes don't play productive at the linebacker position if they're not good at playing football. And they're going to hold on to Carter. Hopefully he gets into a rotational role and maybe can find himself on special teams or something. But as far as being a starting linebacker, I don't think there's any form of development that you could see to where if you're the Bengals, you feel comfortable about putting him out there. But I saw that come across, and I thought that certainly was intriguing. Moving on here, the game last night, wild card weekend was tremendous. The last 2 games, kind of came back down to life a little bit, but for much of this game, it was compelling. Steelers get smacked around. I believe the final was, 30-6, just no chance for Pittsburgh offensively. And we'll start real quick with the Houston side of things here. Houston was doing everything in their power to try to give Pittsburgh a chance in this game. C.J. Stroud, he's got 3 playoff wins now, so I guess credit to him for that. I believe in Stroud. I think he's a solid player. I think the Texans should ponder extending him this offseason, but that's about as bad as you can play and win a game, and win it by the margin in which Houston did. I mean, he put the ball on the turf 4 times in the first half, lost 2 of them, and then the interception down by the goal line is him just panicking and just throwing it right to the Steeler defender. I don't know what in the world C.J. Stroud was doing. He looked like he was seeing ghosts out there and was in over his skis, but credit to him, he was able to pull it together. They won in spite of C.J. Stroud. That thing could have been a lot uglier than it was. The Texans scored a couple of touchdowns on defense, but that defense for Houston, and we've been on this for a really long time, had him at the top of our power rankings really just because of that defense. And by the way, they were starting to run the ball a little bit better too with Chubb and Marks, which is a problem, I think, if you're the New England Patriots. We'll talk about that game a little bit later in the week. But, that defense has separated themselves from the elite defenses in this league, right? People talk about Seattle and Denver and Houston. Seattle and Denver are great. I think you'll probably see that this weekend, but Houston's on a whole different level. They tackle really, really, really well. They get after the passer. They don't have to blitz in order to get after the passer. Will Anderson and Danielle Hunter, tremendous. The contract that Hunter signed, I remember when he signed it thinking, I don't know if that was the right move by Houston. Gave him a ton of money, I think only on a 1-year deal. But, that's working out for them. Him and Anderson have combined for 28 sacks or whatever it is. So they're tremendous. Their corners cover. Laster on the outside's great. Pair him with Stingley, who's one of the best corners in the National Football League. But they're violent, too. Those guys will come down and hit you, and that's what Troy Aikman was saying on the broadcast last night. They'll cover you on the outside fine, but they'll come down in the run game and punish you. And, I think going into the game, if Pittsburgh wasn't going to be able to run it with Warren and Gainwell, they really didn't have much of a chance. They weren't able to run it, and in turn, they didn't have much of a chance. But this Houston team is legit. Stroud can't play like that again if they're going to have another win, but that defense, they don't need Stroud to do much, right? People joke about that, Raven team where Trent Dilfer was the quarterback. He might have to be a little bit better than Dilfer was for the Ravens back in 2000, but not much, because that defense is the real deal, and especially if they can start running the ball a little bit better, which it's been such a struggle for Houston all year running the football, but Chubb showed a little bit of life there. Marks appears like he's a great pick. Got a little bit nicked up in the game. We'll see how he is going forward, but Houston absolutely is the real deal, and if you're the Patriots, you feel good and confident coming off a win and get to host another playoff game, but that game could be a really, really good game between the Houston Texans and the New England Patriots. But from a Pittsburgh side of things, I was wrong on the game. I was wrong. I thought Pittsburgh would hang around, cover the spread, maybe win the game outright. And, they were hanging in there. It was 7-6 for what felt like a large chunk of this game. Again, that was because of C.J. Stroud doing everything in his power to keep Pittsburgh in the game. But, I've said it many times on the show. I'm an Aaron Rodgers guy. I'm not a Steeler guy at all, right? It was great to see the Steelers lose, and you're obviously rooting against the Steelers. But I've always admired Aaron Rodgers as a quarterback, watching him play. And, I kind of felt like that was it. He has his last kind of positive moment with the touchdown to win the division to Calvin Austin in the end zone, but then gets to the playoffs and just wasn't really able to do much. Didn't really have much of a chance. I think Aaron Rodgers in his prime looks a lot better in that game because he's able to move around a little bit more, extend plays a little bit more. But where he's at in his career at his age, like he's not even thinking about going and scrambling for 8 to 10 yards to pick up a first down. Like that used to be automatic for Aaron Rodgers where it's like, okay, everyone's covered. Oh, he breaks a tackle and then boom, 8 yards, first down. He just doesn't have that element to his game anymore, which Father Time catches up to everybody. And then he just doesn't have the guys on the outside that can help him out. Aaron Rodgers has always loved, one-on-one situations, right? When him and Devontae were in Green Bay, it was unbelievable. In the early years where it was, him and Jordy or him and Donald Driver even or Greg Jennings, these guys, when it's a one-on-one situation, Aaron's going to try to get you the ball. But, the Steelers just didn't have guys in these one-on-one spots. And DK Metcalf, the fact that the Pittsburgh Steelers, this is, Omar Khan. Everyone wants to talk about Mike Tomlin getting fired. How about their GM? Their GM has done a horrible job as far as team building, right? They're constantly old. They constantly put all their money to defense, which this day in the NFL, this day and age, you can't be doing that. You got to have more money to the offensive side. Like I said, they're old. They've made a lot of bad draft picks. And the trade for DK Metcalf. John Schneider is one of those guys. We talked about this a little bit during the trade deadline. People love talking about the Brett Veaches of the world, the Howie Rosemans of the world, certainly. But John Schneider in Seattle, he's been there for a while. Moving off of Russell Wilson and getting the loot that they got was genius. And some of the moves that he made was also genius. The move for Shaheed, who keep an eye on him in the playoff game against the 49ers, potentially have a big impact. The move with the Saints at the deadline, we call it the move of the deadline. I think it definitely ended up playing out that way. And then getting off DK Metcalf. Right? That was the Steelers gave him, not only did they make the trade, lost a second-round pick in the process, but they also gave him an extension. Like, I think he's a cut candidate for Pittsburgh. Like, it wouldn't surprise me at all if they cut him. It kind of feels like they have to cut him, right? DK Metcalf's a big dude, and he's a physical guy, but his hands aren't good enough. And you saw that in the game last night. The first drop, the Pittsburgh was actually moving the ball a little bit to start that game. They scored early, and then they had an opportunity to really get into Houston territory on a play where DK was wide open and Aaron put it right on him, dropped the football. And then the one, when they're trying to come back at the end, Aaron's rolling out to his left and just fires a seed. And when you're watching it live, it was just like, nobody really had a chance there. And then they showed the slow-mo, and it's just knifing through a couple of defenders and right in between DK Metcalf's hands. So I think catching the football as a receiver, and it sounds silly to say, but, that's so important, right? Especially in the postseason. Like, you can have all these traits. You can be a big, strong, physical, fast dude. But at the end of the day, if you can't catch the football, they're in deep trouble. And I don't know if obviously he got suspended. They might be able to get out of some guaranteed money that's been floated around a little bit there with DK Metcalf. But, where do you go from here if you're Pittsburgh, right? You paid TJ Watt, which I get, when he was at the peak of his powers, was arguably the best defensive player in the National Football League, but he's an aging guy. Something you give credit to the Bengals for, right? Trey Anderson's an aging guy. They were like, yeah, we don't want to commit to you long term. Instead, Pittsburgh gives TJ Watt this huge contract, and he got, missed some time this year with the collapsed lung or whatever the heck happened there. But TJ Watt's not the TJ Watt that we've seen over the past few years, right? He's an edge guy, and he's gotten a little bit older, right? And they're paying him all the money in the world. Jalen Ramsey, it's a big name, right? When he was at the peak of his powers with the Rams and even to a little bit there, or certainly with the Jaguars and maybe a second there with the Dolphins, but he's a washed player. Right, and they had to move him to safety, and it ultimately didn't really work out very well. Porter's a nice piece there, but Cam Hayward, he's 50 years old too. So where do you go here if you're Pittsburgh? And it seems like Tomlin is under fire a lot, which, rightfully so. We'll talk about that in a second. But to me, I'm looking at the GM. I'm going, this isn't how you build a team, right? Especially in a division with Joe Burrow and Lamar Jackson. Like, this was their year. The Ravens and the Bengals stunk. Like, this was their perfect opportunity. Nobody thought they would have a chance coming in, but they got the chance. And, home playoff game, great defense you're playing against, but kind of a decent draw, right? If you're making the playoffs, like, they weren't going to play Carolina, right? Everybody's going to be pretty solid, decent draw to play, the Houston, and your team is built on defense, and the defense played solid in the game. Of course, Houston scored twice when Pittsburgh had the ball offensively, but, Omar Khan needs to be under fire a little bit for that because the Steelers are going nowhere fast. They need a full restart. That's what, I was arguing against for the Bengals because people were like, oh, fire everybody, get rid of, a bunch of these guys, where it's like, well, you've got a core in place. You got these 3 players on offense that are really, really good. Do you want to blow the whole operation up? Don't think it's the right thing. Whereas you look at Pittsburgh, you can bring Mike Tomlin back and, have him be the head coach, and he's not going to bottom out. He's a good enough coach where he will captain the ship and steer the ship to probably a winning record. That's all he does, right? 9-8, 10-7. But is that really what you want to be if you're Pittsburgh? I think if you want to get back to that level of Pittsburgh Steeler football, you got to move off him, and then you got to go in a different direction as a team. You got to figure out what to do at the quarterback position. You got to draft some guys, some weapons on the outside, and kind of go from there. But you're in a very difficult spot if you're the Pittsburgh Steelers, and you're really going nowhere fast. And I think it'd be the best decision for them to move off it. Now, we'll see if Tomlin's banging the table and says, no, I want to come back. Do you fire him? I don't know. But if he just kind of sits there and goes, you know what, maybe this thing's run its course. Let's think about a potential trade, right? That could work out for him. I think people have floated around him doing TV, right? Maybe he takes a step away. He would be a top-of-the-line candidate if he was removed now. But imagine if he left for a year and sat out for a year, how big time of a candidate he would be the following cycle. So I just don't think if you're Pittsburgh, you have much of an identity right now, and you need a total reshift in how you're operating it as an organization. And, unfortunately for them, probably going to need a year or two where you win 5 or 6 games. But I think that could set you up for future success as opposed to just continuing to run this thing back with Mike Tomlin winning 9-10 games and getting blown out in the playoffs. And this stat came across Chatterbox Sports. We had this graphic out last night. Mike Tomlin ties Marvin Lewis for the most consecutive playoff losses in NFL history at 7. And I get, he's not Marvin Lewis, right? He has a world championship. He's a lot more, well respected as a head coach. Marvin's well respected, but as a head coach and a winning coach around the league, but that's not good company there. 7 straight playoff wins, and I don't have the margins in front of me, but it's pretty out of hand. Because they're usually not competing here at this point. All right, let's talk more about these head coach openings here. Several, 8 here at this point that are currently open across the National Football League. And we'll see ultimately if more become open over the course of the next few days. I think, there's a world where Green Bay becomes open. I don't think it should become open personally. Sirianni in Philadelphia, could that become open? I think there's a possibility that happens there as well. And, of course, Mike Tomlin, we were just talking about with the Pittsburgh Steelers, could potentially also become open. So we'll kind of roll through these jobs, 8 at this point, and then I'll kind of rank them. I think clearly Baltimore's one, but from beyond that, there certainly is some conversation that can happen here. But the Cardinals, we'll kind of go in alphabetical order here by city, but Clint Kubiak is viewed as their top guy. Kubiak's done a really nice job. He was in New Orleans as the play caller, had some good moments there, and then ultimately leaves, and this past year has been the play caller with the Seattle Seahawks, and has done a really nice job. It just kind of feels like his time is coming to be a head coach in the NFL. His dad, of course, Gary Kubiak, coach of the Broncos, coach of the Texans, well-respected around the league. And Kubiak, that's just kind of one of those coaching families, right? You hear it with, Shula certainly, or, a Shanahan, of course, there as well. But Kubiak is just kind of a football family and a coaching family. So people view Kubiak as kind of the leader for Arizona. But when I look at these jobs, I personally think that's the worst possible job that you could get. I get it's Arizona. It's not a bad place to live. But you look at that division. You got McVay twice a year. You got Shanahan twice a year. And you got Mike McDonald twice a year. That is the real deal as far as coaches go. And you could argue that's 3 of the top 5 coaches in the NFL right there in your division. You're paying a quarterback who's not going to be the future, right? You can't afford to hang around with Kyler Murray and continue to do business with him, so you got to move off him. And then you're picking, 3rd in the draft? Is there really a guy that you feel good about picking at 3? I think Ty Simpson is a guy, but I don't think he's a top 5 pick. So maybe you trade back and look to go from there. But the defense was horrible. Bad luck with injuries. Marvin Harrison was better with Jacoby Brissett, but does he look like a top 5 pick? Absolutely not. The Cardinals are in deep trouble, especially in that division. So, I can see somebody, taking a gamble, like if they only have, one off, like Stefanski, he's not going to Arizona. Harbaugh's not going to Arizona, right? I don't think Robert Saleh would go to Arizona either, but if it's like if Dan Pitcher got offered Arizona, he'd probably go, right? Because he doesn't have many other options. But that, to me, is just the least attractive job out of all these, because the mess at quarterback, not a good roster, the division that you have to walk into, that's just a steep uphill battle. And the Cardinals, ever since Carson Palmer left, have just been bad, right? They've just been bad for a long time. Guys getting fired left and right. They need to figure out the head coach, though, because Gannon, that was a horrible hire. And we'll see if they're able to, get that hire right. But ever since, Bruce Arians was there, they haven't got the head coach right. They, did business with Cliff Kingsbury. That didn't work out. And the Gannon stuff obviously didn't work out either. So to me, the Cardinals, that's like the least attractive job out of all of them here at this point. And then I got Atlanta is next up here. Harbaugh certainly has been connected with Atlanta. Stefanski, of course, as well. Anthony Weaver, DC for the Dolphins. Mike McDaniel, Jeff Hafley, and then Kubiak there as well. I think this is more of an attractive job. The Falcons have been, they're not the Ravens or the Packers, but it's a respected organization, right? They won a ton of games with Matt Ryan. Now he's coming back as the president of football or whatever his title is here at this point. They certainly have some questions. Again, if these jobs are open, like it's not like you got 8 Ravens jobs open, right? Like you get one that's really, really good. But for the most part, there's a reason it became open because things weren't going well at these spots. But, there's stability there with ownership. Arthur Blank. Does he meddle a little bit too much? Maybe, but it's a well-oiled machine in Atlanta. It's a big market, big city, and it's a division that you can go in and have success immediately. It's the worst division in pro football. Play New Orleans, Carolina, and Tampa Bay. They're in that division. So I've got this job opening ranked 3 right now. I think there's a world where they land Harbaugh. I think there's a world where they land Stefanski. And to me, those are the 2 hottest, 2 of the best head coaching candidates here at this point. But you got to figure out what's going on at quarterback rather. Kirk Cousins is still hanging around, collecting his checks, making a ton of money. I got a lot of love and respect for Kirk Cousins, but his time as a starter in this league is over. So just a fleece job by him and his agent to get as much money as he has. I think certainly, the Achilles injury hurt him, and the Falcons rolled the dice on, let's pay an old guy coming off an Achilles injury, and that kind of blew up in their face a little bit, and you saw him kind of panic there and take a quarterback. Unfortunately for them, they took a quarterback that has a laundry list of injury history, and he partially tears his ACL this past year. So Atlanta, there's some pieces there defensively. James Pierce Jr. was a heck of a pick for them. Could be a Cincinnati Bengal. Unfortunately, he's not. You got Bates on the back end. You got some guys that can cover. Bijan Robinson, that guy can be a superstar. Like, that guy's the best player on your team, and he can lead your offense. Like, you don't need, obviously you need to figure out the quarterback position in order to win Super Bowls, right? But you can win a lot of games with Bijan Robinson and just a competent quarterback that goes in there and doesn't turn the ball over. So I think Stefanski, would fit well in there. Harbaugh, I think to me, like, if you get Stefanski in that spot and bring in like a Mac Jones, I think you can win a lot of games in that division if you're the Atlanta Falcons. I just came up with that on the spot. I kind of like that a lot. Hire Stefanski, trade for Mac Jones if you're Atlanta, and you win. You're in the playoffs next year. How about that? 9-10 or 10-11 wins. Hire Stefanski and trade for Mac Jones, and there you go. But I think they'll probably try to stick with Penix here, but to me, I've seen enough. I'm not afraid to rip the Band-Aid off at that position. It was aggressive to pick him at 8. It was reckless. It was silly / borderline stupid to do that there as well. And once they figure out that position, they have some guys. They have some guys on the outside. Drake London, again, weak division. That to me is an attractive job. An attractive job. I've got it at 3 as far as these 8 openings go at this point. And then Baltimore. Clearly the most attractive job, right? If Green Bay becomes open, maybe you have that conversation, but you got Lamar Jackson, right? And down year for Lamar Jackson. The injury thing is a concern. People love saying, oh, Joe Burrow, he gets hurt all the time. Lamar Jackson gets hurt all the time, too. Now, he doesn't have these season-ending injuries, but he misses time each and every year. And then he always has an illness, too, throughout each and every year. So, look, I think some people after this year, I've heard some conversations around Lamar like, oh, he's not a top-of-the-line guy. And I never said he was Josh Allen, Patrick Mahomes, or Joe Burrow, but he's the next best thing. And some people, I think, around the league have kind of forgotten that. At some point, he's going to lose some speed. Maybe he's already lost a step or two, and that's going to be challenging for him. But Lamar Jackson's the real deal, and because of him alone, this is the number one job opening. But when you couple that with an organization that is one of the most well-respected organizations in the NFL, Eric DeCosta, of course, their GM, their owner, Bisciotti, does a tremendous job, and it's just it's like the Eagles, right? It's like the Packers. You respect them, and they're always seemingly in the mix. They always win a bunch of games, but they weren't afraid to move off Harbaugh. I still believe that was a mistake, but they're sitting there going, we got Lamar Jackson here, and we've been doing this thing where, usually we're making the playoffs, winning a game or two. This year, of course, you missed the playoffs, but their expectations in Baltimore are the same expectations we have here in Cincinnati. If you have the guy at that position that is that good, your expectations should be Super Bowl. And Harbaugh hasn't been able to get him to this point, and they made the decision to move off him. So it's going to be fascinating to see who the Baltimore Ravens hire. And I think there is a real world where they hire Kevin Stefanski. And Kevin Stefanski, to me, that would be, for a head coach, that would be like best case scenario. To be up in Cleveland, have to deal with the Cleveland Browns, be there, win a couple coaches of the year, win a bunch of games, and then get fired, which, that's just Cleveland, right? Stefanski is a head coach, a good head coach, right? Is he, Andy Reid or Sean McVay or Kyle Shanahan? No, but he's a really good head coach. And Cleveland just were like, I guess we'll fire him because, we're kind of a mess, so we'll just fire one of the best things that we got going, which is our head coach. You could argue, besides Myles Garrett, like Stefanski was the best thing that Cleveland had going. And they said, I guess we'll fire him, right? So if he goes to Baltimore, immediately stays in the division, upgrades quarterback, obviously, upgrades team, upgrades organization, he's going to beat the crap out of the Browns for 8 years, 5 to 8 years, 5 to 7 years, as long as he got Lamar Jackson there playing quarterback. So that would be unbelievable for Stefanski if he was able to do that. Bringing in an offensive mind, I think, it's fascinating to see how Baltimore does this, because do they want to get back to their identity, which was, Terrell Suggs, Ray Lewis, Ed Reed, and smash mouth defensive football? Then you're probably looking at a guy like Robert Saleh that could do that. Or do you want to bring in some guy that knows offensive football that really can get the best out of Lamar Jackson? You saw that from Monken early. Things got a little bit stale as time went on. I kind of believe that I'm still of the mind that, offense is king in this league. That's getting proven a little bit wrong here at this point, with how some of these teams are winning. Like if Houston goes to the Super Bowl or wins the Super Bowl, or Seattle or Denver, one of these teams, and maybe it's like, actually, defense is kind of regaining some importance here. But I think with Lamar Jackson, a star quarterback, get him an offensive guy that can really help him as he kind of enters this next phase of his career. Stefanski, to me, would be a home run hire for the Baltimore Ravens. Flores, they're throwing out his name. I wouldn't hire Brian Flores. Great defensive coordinator. I think that's his thing. The way he handled things from a leadership perspective in Miami was just embarrassing, candidly, for him. And, some guys are great coordinators, are not meant to be head coaches. I think he'll get another opportunity at some point, but I don't see it going well. I would not hire Brian Flores. McDaniel interviewed with Baltimore. Imagine that, right? You leave Miami. Oh, here's Lamar Jackson in Baltimore. That could be very, very intriguing. McDaniel, kind of a dark horse guy for the Baltimore Ravens. His offense with Derrick Henry and Lamar Jackson, that could potentially be fireworks, but then you're probably looking at some serious issues still defensively for the Ravens. But that could be a heck of a lot of fun for Baltimore if you brought in a guy like Mike McDaniel. To me, McDaniel, we thought he was going to stick around. I thought he should have stuck around as the Dolphins guy, and they move off him. I think there's a world where he is hired as a head coach this cycle. I really do. And Rodgers was talking about this after the game last night during his post game. Like, when I was growing up as a kid, you didn't see these owners be so impulsive, right? But now there's more money than ever. They're mega billionaires, right? So it's just a rounding error to fire a guy and round up the check and say, okay, we'll move on. But some of these coaches get moved off of too quickly. Stefanski, to me, like, he didn't deserve to be fired, and I didn't think McDaniel deserved to be fired either. But those are two of the top of the line candidates here at this point going forward. Davis Webb, also a guy. There's always some guy in these coaching cycles that pops out of nowhere that nobody was expecting. And Davis Webb is only 30 years old. He's on Sean Payton's staff in Denver. He's the quarterback coach. He played quarterback. I believe he actually played quarterback for Cliff Kingsbury when he was at Tech, as funny as that is. And people people are viewing him for offensive coordinator jobs, but people are interviewing him for head coaching jobs there as well. We'll get to the Vegas opening in a second, but, if you really want to roll the dice and try to find your next Sean McVay, some youngster to come in, that's an interesting name to monitor. Apparently Baltimore has a little bit of interest in Davis Webb. Joe Brady, of course, as well. I just don't see him as a head coach here at this point. I mean, he's got Josh Allen, so that's going to probably get him a job at some point. Kind of what I was talking about with Pitch and Joe Burrow at the beginning of the show. But I don't know. There's a lot of other candidates I would go to before Joe Brady. But the Ravens job, that's going to be a huge domino that falls because all these teams, obviously the Ravens don't have interest in Harbaugh, but all these teams pretty much have interest in Stefanski. And if the Ravens take him, I think you'll see some dominoes fall after that. Cleveland. Mike McDaniel's viewed as the candidate. He, of course, was in Cleveland with Kyle Shanahan, with Johnny Manziel, has spent some time there. Jeremy Fowler of ESPN reported before Stefanski was even fired that they had interest in Mike McDaniel. Leaving Stefanski and then getting McDaniel, I don't really get that, right? Because the offensive-minded guy, two really smart guys, is that really the shift that you need? Cleveland needs a culture. They need structure, and that's not McDaniel. He'll bring schematics and creativity and play calling, but they need a lot more structure in Cleveland, and I don't know if he'd be the right guy. If I'm Baltimore, I think you already kind of have a culture, right? You want to bring in some guru to work with Lamar and Derrick Henry. I think that could certainly be intriguing. But Cleveland, I don't know. Now, if they offer him the job, he's going to take it, right? He's obviously going to want to be a head coach rather than an offensive coordinator, and he deserves another chance. But but then again, you could put McVay in Cleveland. Is it going to work? I don't know. It's Cleveland. It's Cleveland. That's the best I can do to explain that. Harbaugh, it was kind of interesting. I'm sure he's got some, connections through the AFC North with Cleveland. That would be a home run for them if they were able to get him. But if I'm Harbaugh, everybody wants you. Why would you go to Cleveland over, Atlanta or even Miami? I think really I would go to Miami certainly over Cleveland, or the Giants of course over them. So I was kind of surprised to see that. Maybe a little bit of mutual interest there, but we'll see what happens ultimately with Cleveland. Jim Schwartz apparently has been thrown around a little bit. The defensive coordinator, that would be the most Cleveland thing ever. Let's just promote him. Or Tommy Rees interviewed as well, their OC, who was their tight ends coach. That would just be going nowhere fast if you promote one of those guys. So you got to go outside and try to bring in a top-of-the-line candidate. Apparently Todd Monken as well, who was, of course, Harbaugh's offensive coordinator in Baltimore, has some interest with Cleveland. But I just, you went out there and you gave Deshaun Watson all this guaranteed money, and the guy that did that still is employed as your GM. You haven't been able to get a feel for offense throughout my entire life. So I just, it's Cleveland. They're going to continue to stink until, something drastic happens and they figure out quarterback, but I don't see them figuring out that position this year either. So I've got the Browns at 7. I think Arizona's a little bit worse. You've got some pieces there with Myles Garrett as the best defensive player in the game. Good defensive players. So I don't think it's as bad as the Cardinal job, but I'm staying away. I'm not touching that job with a 10-foot pole if I'm John Harbaugh. Raiders. Kind of what I was talking about a little bit with the Cardinal job, where it's you look at that division, you're like, well, Andy Reid and Mahomes twice a year, Harbaugh and Herbert twice a year, and now Sean Payton and Bo Nix look like they're a viable threat twice a year. And mind you, all those teams have good defenses as well. It's an uphill battle for Vegas, but the number 1 overall pick, there's a lot to be said about having the number 1 overall pick, and I think that kind of boosts the Raiders' job. If they had the 3rd pick, I'd be staying away from the Raiders. But all of a sudden, you got the ability to take Mendoza, right? And, I've awakened to the idea that Mendoza's a really, really good player. Is it going to translate to him being an elite NFL quarterback? I don't know. But if you have the number 1 overall pick and you need a quarterback, you have to take him. That's how I feel. Certainly, if you're the Jets or the Cardinals, you're doing everything in your power to throw draft picks at Vegas and say, we'll give you all these picks for the first pick to try to get Mendoza. But if you're the Raiders, you're standing pat and you're picking Mendoza at 1. So there's some intrigue that comes with that. But you look at that roster, and it's they probably need to trade Max Crosby. I know he doesn't want to be, but, you got to get some more picks in here, and you got to find a way to get some more pieces because they didn't have a very good draft last year. Their offensive line's horrible, so if you put a running back behind a horrible offensive line, it's not going to look good. But something tells me Genty is not the guy that they thought when they picked him, and they picked him so early. That's so early for a running back. Unless you're Jahmyr Gibbs, you shouldn't be picking a running back that early. And again, we'll see if he gets a more stable offensive line, if it's able to look a little bit better. going forward for him. But the fact they have the first pick makes it intriguing. I think Saleh is certainly a name that comes to mind. But then again, if you're bringing in a rookie, like, I want to get him some tutelage. I want to give him a guy that knows what he's doing, and that's why I think this Davis Webb stuff, we talked about him for the Ravens opening. He's 30 years old. I feel like he could really, help Mendoza along and really kind of be that tutor for him and help. And, it's Tom Brady. They just went really old with a 70-plus-year-old head coach in Pete Carroll. Wouldn't surprise me if they completely flipped it and said, let's bring in a young gun here. It just kind of feels like the vibe. Like, Brady's an older guy. He's 48 or whatever he is now, but he just, he's hanging out with people that are a lot younger, if you know what I'm saying there. But he just kind of feels like he's more tapped into being young. Same with the GM Spytech. Like, it wouldn't surprise me at all if they went to try to find their next Shanahan, McVay, young guy. And I think Davis Webb to Vegas could be an interesting one for the Raiders. Stefanski, certainly as well. You bring him in, pair him with Mendoza. Again, I think you can make the argument for Stefanski for all of these openings, besides, of course, Cleveland. So that's an interesting name there as well. Vance Joseph has interviewed with them. Again, some of these guys have done it before, and I'm just like, I don't need to see it again. Matt Nagy, another one. He kind of lucked into the coach of the year the one time they won it with the Bears where they had a really good defense that year. But, some guys are just coordinators. Nagy, he doesn't call the plays for Kansas City, but clearly Mahomes likes him, and clearly he's got the experience, the Super Bowl experience, and it clearly works well. But head coach, we've seen it. It wasn't good. You won coach of the year, nice, but your defense was great. I just don't need to see guys like Vance Joseph and Nagy get another opportunity. I've seen it enough, and, those guys are coordinators, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But the Raiders I have at 5, just because they have that one pick. There's a kind of a mess, lots of dysfunction. You're walking into just a brutally difficult division. But Mendoza, right? I mean, if you get that position right, there's no stopping you, right? You can compete with anybody in this league if you have that position right. And there's a lot of people out there that think Mendoza is that guy. And I'm starting to believe that's the case too, personally. Titans have him at 6. I think it's better than the Browns, certainly. And the Cardinals going a little out of order here. We'll get to the Dolphins and the Giants in a second. But apparently Nagy's the top of the list for them. That would be a mistake. You have Cam Ward in place who, sometimes these drafts, they come up and it's like, okay, you need a quarterback and you have the first pick. You have to take this guy. That's how I felt with the Bears and Caleb Williams. Like, I was a huge Drake May guy, but to take Drake May over Caleb Williams, which now, by the way, I think that would be the right call. Maybe that's a hot take. I don't think it should be. But back then, you had to take Caleb Williams. I kind of felt that way last year, where it's like you have the first pick. I thought Cam Ward was worthy of that pick. And, he had so much dysfunction. His coach gets fired. The offensive line's terrible. They can't run the ball. They don't have skill guys. Like, the Titans are just a complete mess. But it's a division that's a little bit attainable in the South, but it appears to be trending in the right direction. I mean, the Jaguars and the Texans aren't going anywhere, and the Colts looked like a world beater to begin the year, so maybe it's not as weak of a division as maybe some people thought. But you have a quarterback on a rookie deal. It just comes down to your belief in Cam Ward. If you think you can win with Cam Ward, this is a job that you sign up for. If you don't, then you don't. And, living in Nashville, worst places to live. So I got the Titans at 6. Apparently Nagy, Stefanski guys they're talking to. They've also interviewed some other guys. Jason Garrett throwing his hat back into the ring there. Has been out of coaching since he, got fired from the Dallas job. It's been, working in TV. You get to that point where it's like if you're Sean Payton and you sit out 1 year, great. But if you're starting to sit out like more than 5 years, I don't know off the top of my head the last time Garrett was the head coach, but it's been a long time. I don't know if you want to be out of the game that long and then bring him in, especially to an organization that needs so much help. And then Spags also, defense coordinator for the Chiefs. When he was head coach, it didn't go well at all. That's why he's been in D.C. for so long. Anarumo also getting interviewed. Like, if they hired one of those guys, I think that would be a mistake. But one guy, I think, for me, that hasn't gotten as much love is Mike McCarthy. He's not that sexy hire. He's not a guy that's going to come in and you're like, oh, we're winning the Super Bowl. But Mike McCarthy's going to win some games. And I think McCarthy to Tennessee, that would be a good hire for Tennessee. Just some stability. Get this thing going in the right track. You're not going to make the playoffs next year, regardless of who you hire. So I think Mike McCarthy to Tennessee. I don't think there's a lot of jobs that you think about McCarthy, but he's not getting as much love as I thought. He sits out after winning a bunch of games in Dallas. So Yeah, if I'm McCarthy, if I'm Tennessee, McCarthy might be my top guy, to be completely honest with you. But I've got him at 6. Better than the Browns' job, I think. Better than the Cardinals' job, but really not a great job. All right, 2 more here. Dolphins and Giants. The Dolphins are in kind of a precarious situation here because they made the move where it looked like they were keeping McDaniel, and then like Black Monday happens, and then it was like on that Wednesday or Thursday when they say, actually, we're going to move off him. And I'm sitting there going, well, one, it's kind of awkward that you waited a couple of days to do it. You must think you have something here. And, the reports come out that, Harbaugh and the ownership group and Miami have been close and have discussed or whatever. But if you miss on Harbaugh and you're the Dolphins, like, you're in a really difficult spot because I don't think you can roll Tua out there as your week 1 starter despite the fact you paid him a ton of money. You need some stability here, and I kind of feel like they took a step in the wrong direction. I don't think they needed a full restart from a coaching perspective. They did from a quarterback perspective, but now you get rid of the coach. Quarterback shouldn't be a starter. You got guys that are going to be leaving in free agency. So, I think the Dolphins, again, I view the Dolphins as somewhat of an attractive job despite the fact that they have a lot of different holes. It's not the Ravens, it's not the Giants, it's not the Falcons, but I've got it at 4. It's Miami. It's a proud organization despite the fact they haven't won for much of my life. I think the NFL is better if the Dolphins are better. I haven't really seen that. You thought for a little bit there with Tua and McDaniel, but ultimately that ran its course. What type of guy do you bring in? I think Harbaugh would be like the perfect fit, but unfortunately for Miami, Atlanta wants him, and the Giants want him, and I think those 2 openings are more attractive than your opening in Miami. So Chris Shula is a name that's being floated around. His grandfather, of course, is Don Shula, who's regarded as one of the best coaches of all time. So there's some, kind of a storybook Hollywood feel there, which, I don't know about that. But, people had talked about Shula for the Bengals if Taylor was fired. And I'm like, do we know who his dad is? Because that was the guy that was steering the ship here in the mid-'90s. And he won like less than 20 games over 5 years and was just when you talk about like the Bengals being down bad, it was the Shula years, and like he didn't get a job in coaching after that. Like he literally was head coach of the Bengals, and that was it. So regardless of how good his kid might be, and his kid might be great. I mean, he seems to be a great DC for McVay in Los Angeles, but he was no way was he coming to Cincinnati. And maybe he's the top candidate for the Dolphins. I don't know. But if you're Miami, I think you're doing everything in your power to get Stefanski or Harbaugh, because if you don't get one of those 2 guys, you're looking at it going, well, the next best guy is Mike McDaniel, and we just fired him. So they're in a tough spot. Saleh will be under consideration. Kubiak, I think, certainly as well for the Dolphins. But they got to figure out what they're doing at quarterback. I mean, do you pick Ty Simpson, right? Do you try to get a bridge guy, Joe Flacco, maybe, to come in? Do you run it back with Tua? I don't think you can, but I don't know. They've got a lot of decisions, and they've got to hit this out of the park because they let go of Mike McDaniel, and if you don't get Stefanski or Harbaugh, you're in a tough spot. Lastly, the Giants. A name that I haven't mentioned yet to this point. He's going to be interviewing. He's interviewing all over here today, and will continue to interview. I think he should be a head coach this cycle. Jeff Hafley, DC for the Packers. Did the fourth quarter end well against the Bears? No, but Hafley, I think, is ready to be a head coach. Credit to him. He was the head coach at Boston College, which it's impossible to win at Boston College, and then he leaves to be a coordinator in the NFL, and people were kind of like, oh, I don't know about that, leaving to be a coordinator in the NFL, but he was done with the portal, sick of the NIL and all that, and was like, no, I want to get to the NFL, and now he's, a top-of-the-line head coaching candidate in this cycle, and, maybe he ends back in Green Bay as the DC, and then he'll get a job in the coming years, but at some point, Hafley's going to be head coach. I think he'll have some success, and, the Giants apparently are very interested. I think that could be a good thing, but, I've fallen back on this theme several times. If you have a young quarterback, I think giving him a tutor, giving him a guide as his coach, certainly you have to get the coordinator right if he's not the head coach, but I don't know if, Hafley would be the best decision for Jackson Dart. But from a culture perspective, leadership perspective, I think Hafley would be a good fit. And I look at the Giants as the second best job because they've got pieces on that defense, and they've clearly have drafted solid over the past year or two, which is the only reason Joe Shane still has a job. But I think Dart, I'm not going to say he's going to be, the bona fide stud, but you got to be intrigued with what you've seen in Jackson Dart. He's got to take care of himself a little bit better. But if you're a head coach, if you're Stefanski and Harbaugh, And if you're Stefanski and you can't get the Raven job, I think the Giant job is probably the next best job. I would say the second best job here at this cycle, here at this point as we're doing this live. But Spags apparently has interviewed with them as well. Anarumo, hard to imagine Lou will be a head coach at this cycle, certainly. And Raheem Morris apparently interviewed for them, but that would be just a horrible decision by the Giants. Again, Morris is one of those guys where I've seen it. I did it once for a couple of years in Atlanta, and ultimately it didn't work out well enough. Guy's a coordinator, and that's okay. But those are kind of where we're at here with these head coaching hires. 8 jobs currently open as we're doing this live. Harbaugh, Stefanski, clearly the top 2 candidates. And keep an eye on Mike McDaniel because, I think Baltimore would rather have Stefanski. But let's say Stefanski says, actually, I want to go to New York, which I think would be crazy. I don't think he would do that. But Mike McDaniel to Baltimore is interesting. Again, I just came up with that live here on the show, but it's kind of interesting to monitor. Just about out of time. We'll touch on this Bregman stuff real quick. Appreciate everybody hanging out with us throughout the duration of this show. Actually, we'll save the Bregman stuff here as we're just about out of time here, just about at our hour mark here. But Bregman going to the Cubs, and obviously not good for the Reds. Reds have made some moves. They got the relief pitcher that they're paying a good chunk of change. Looks like the Reds have spent, over $20 million on their bullpen and have yet to add a bat, which mentioned this on Off the Bench. Looking at the Cincinnati Bengals, going into this year, going into 2025, before the season, we're like, address the defense. Get some guys that can come in and contribute. And then they didn't. And then the defense sucked, and that was the reason they missed the playoffs. And then with the Reds, great. You made the postseason last year, wild card round against the Dodgers. Woo! Add a bat. Add one bat to this team. And didn't do that either. So kind of feels like we're kind of headed for the same kind of season here for the Reds. But with that rotation, if it looks like the Reds are banking on, Marte is going to take a step. Marte was great last year. McLean's going to take a step. Sal Stewart's going to be able to be a really good young player. Ellie's going to take a step. And then you will roll. And if all those things happen, great, you can win the division. But I don't think you saw enough from those guys offensively in order to have confidence that will happen. But we'll see. I don't think a trade is out of the picture. We'll try to get a Reds guy on. Had Chris Welsh on last week. That was awesome. But try to get somebody maybe on the beats here next week or so to kind of talk before pitchers and catchers report, which wish we were talking about Bengals in the postseason, but pitchers and catchers around the corner, that certainly is very productive and certainly something we're looking forward to here at the show. But appreciate everyone as always. Got guests lined up for Thursday and Friday. Stick around for that. See if we can get one tomorrow or not, but we'll continue to monitor this head coaching stuff, continue to talk NFL here on the show, and we'll get to more basketball stuff going forward as well. I'm putting off, as you could probably tell, the Wes Miller conversation. We've had it a million times, but didn't even talk about the UCF game here on the show. Lost by 1 point. Mustafa Cham, okay, you finally saw some stuff out of him. That was positive, but just another opportunity to win the game late and not able to do it. So they got Colorado this week, and they're a lot better than UC. Not a great team, but they're better than UC. We'll see how Wes Miller and company handle that at home. But appreciate everyone as always. Subscribe if you haven't done so already. Check out the podcast wherever you get your podcasts, and we'll talk to you again tomorrow. Take care, everybody.